is kept under better control. The people who Walter Lippmann once called the ignorant and meddlesome outsiders, meaning the general population, generally don't intrude where they don't belong, like in the political arena. But when they do, you really have to beat them down, because otherwise we're in bad trouble. Well, Clinton's performance on the NAFTA issue, again, won great praise. There was another front-page article in the New York Times the day the vote passed by their Washington correspondent, R.W. Apple, in which I can't duplicate this, so I'll quote it for you. He said, "Mr. Clinton retreated early on Bosnia, on Haiti, on homosexuals in the military, on important elements of his economic plan." That's a reference to the tiny stimulative package. "He seemed ready to compromise on all but the most basic elements of his health care reforms. Critics asked whether he had a bottom line on anything. On NAFTA, he did, and that question won't be asked for a while." In other words, he silenced his detractors. When it's simply a matter of the lives of millions of people, our man is pragmatic and knows how to give up. But when it comes to the call, to responding to the call of business power, he showed he really has backbone after all. So there is a bottom line, and our hero is a man of principle, as we had hoped. Well, that's, again, a natural reaction to a conflict where a great deal was perceived to be at stake. And it's interesting to ask exactly what was perceived to be at stake that caused this hysterical reaction in which class loyalties were expressed with such complete candor and, in fact, fanaticism. Another article that appeared in the New York Times the day after the vote. That's incidentally one of my favorite issues of the New York Times, that day after the vote. There was another one which gave the first analysis that the Times had presented of what the economic effects of the NAFTA agreement were likely to be for the New York region. And it spelled them out. Well, let me see if I got it here. It said that there would be many gainers. The gainers would be sectors based in and around finance, the region's banking, telecommunications, and service firms, insurance companies, investment houses, corporate law firms, the PR industry, a vast assortment of such professional service firms, from management, consultants, and public relations to law and marketing. They're all poised to seek new businesses in Mexico. Banks and Wall Street securities firms, which would probably draw more benefit from the pact than any other businesses, say they're itching to buy Mexican businesses or invest in them. Some manufacturers would gain, namely high-tech industry and pharmaceuticals, both of which would benefit, they didn't mention this, but I add, would benefit from the increased protection. This version of NAFTA is highly protectionist, which is why American corporations liked it so much. A major part of that was increased protection for patents and what's called intellectual property, generally provisions that are designed to ensure that the technology of the future and the products of the future will be monopolized by U.S.-based transnational corporations. In addition, they said two of the region's two largest manufacturing industries would benefit, namely the capital-intensive chemical industry, not many workers there, so they'll benefit, and publishing. Well, they'll, of course, benefit from the highly protectionist measures that are being added. Publishing doesn't refer to Covered Action Quarterly and Lies of Our Times, but to the enormous propaganda apparatus run by the corporate system, which will indeed benefit. Incidentally, that they didn't ask whether that raises some ominous questions about the Times editorial position, but I'll put that one aside. They also mentioned, there's a couple of sentences scattered in the article that says, well, you know, it's not perfect. There's going to be a few losers, too. Here's the losers. Predominantly women, blacks, and Hispanics, and semi-skilled production workers, which means about 3/4 of the workforce. So in other words, it's not perfect, you know, but basically pretty good. Going back to Anthony Lewis and labor being driven by fear of foreigners and fear of change and being unenlightened, I mean, looking at the predictions, one can perhaps draw some other conclusions. I should say that these analyses of the effects of NAFTA are quite general across the board. If you look at economists who supported it, which is almost all of them, and the few who questioned it, they do agree on some things. They agree that it will have the effect of increasing the polarization of the society. That means the benefits from NAFTA will be highly concentrated in wealthy sectors, the kind that the Times listed. And the costs of NAFTA, this version of NAFTA, will, in fact, it's designed for this purpose. You can imagine other NAFTAs, but this NAFTA was designed so that the costs will spread over the whole population, who will probably suffer an absolute decline from it. So one of the most highly regarded analyses by a professor at UCLA estimates that by the end of the decade, this version, he, I think, is in favor of NAFTA, that by the end of the decade, this version of NAFTA will add about $3,000 annual income to sectors of the kind that the Times listed among the gainers, and it will lead to about a $700 a year annual decline, absolute decline in real income for the losers that the Times indicated, the workforce by and large. And that'll average out, he estimated, to a loss for the general population of about $200 a year in real income by the end of the decade. Well, exactly what effect NAFTA will have on job flow is kind of hard to estimate. Those are sort of meaningless calculations because the economic models are so ridiculous that they don't tell you anything. But the effect on polarization is very plausible, and in fact held with near unanimity. Even the most fervent advocates of NAFTA conceded that it's going to have this effect of harming semi-skilled workers, which, again, I stress, means about 70 or 75% of the workforce, and other losers like women, blacks, Hispanics, and other kind of minor elements like that. You can begin to see why NAFTA became a matter of such significance that's one reason why NAFTA became a matter of such significance to the political class and the propaganda system and their articulate spokespersons. Incidentally, what's the effect that's expected in Mexico? Interestingly, exactly the same. It's expected that the impact on Mexico will be structurally the same, although probably more drastic because it's a weaker economy. There will be sectors that will gain. Multinationals, which have Mexican bases, the people involved in them, corporate lawyers, investors, banks, and so on, they're likely to gain, just as in the United States, but there are many fewer of them, so there'll be less of a gain. And the losers are expected to be the workforce and the peasantry, fairly substantial losers, in fact. The leading financial journal in Mexico, which is very pro-NAFTA, estimated that Mexico would lose about 25% of its manufacturing industry within the first 2 years and about 15% of its workforce. Other analyses estimate that millions of peasants will be driven, it's happening anyway, but millions more peasants will be driven off the land by cheap agricultural exports from U.S. agribusiness. The net effect of this is to swell enormously the unemployed, reserve army in Mexico, which naturally means driving down wages. It's obvious. There's no way to counter that in Mexico because union organizing ranges from difficult to impossible. There were enormous protests in Mexico, not reported here, against the agreement, mainly because Mexican workers and peasants guessed, and others, that the purpose and the effect of NAFTA would be to erode or destroy the constitutional guarantees for workers' rights and educational rights and so on. Those guarantees are significant. They're not always implemented, in fact, far from implemented, but the achievement of them was significant, and to eliminate them would be a major victory for transnational power. So the strong likelihood is that both in Mexico and the United States, and of course in Canada, the agreement will increase the polarization, perhaps sharply, that's been taking place anyway. Inequality has been growing in the United States for the past 30 years. Real wages have been declining since about late 60s. They even began to decline for people with college education during the Reagan years. the society is breaking up into